Hey, tourpreneurs, it's Mitch Bach, and just a quick note before we begin today's episode. Tourpreneur is currently sponsored by Google. We're thankful for their support of our community, and we are offering with them a completely free course helping you unlock the power and potential of Google's Things to Do program, which is specifically helping tour operators add their tours to Google in new ways that gives you new exposure and more direct bookings. To learn more, go to tourpreneur.com/Google. And as always, show notes, more resources, links to our newsletter, our business coaching community, and so much more are available on tourpreneur.com. Now to the episode.
This episode of Tourpreneur is sponsored by Fair Harbor. Fair Harbor fuels the experiences of the travel industry with the most comprehensive online reservation system available for tours, activities, and attractions. Visit fairharbor.com to see why over 15,000 businesses worldwide trust Fair Harbor to better serve their customers and increase online bookings.
Welcome to the Tourpreneur podcast. Travel industry veteran Shane Whaley will take you on a journey with fellow tourpreneurs, sharing their tips, ideas, insights, and success stories to inspire you to make your tour business the best it can be. And now, here is your host, Shane Whaley.
Hello and welcome to episode 151 of Tourpreneur. This is the podcast where we flatten the learning curve for tour operators and travel professionals around the world. Today, we bring you a conversation with John Coupland. John is the tourpreneur behind John England Tours. He offers private day tours to castles and historic places in southeast England. He operates both as a driver guide and he operates as a tour guide for private walking tours in London. One of his popular tours is actually one that takes guests to filming locations behind the TV hit series The Crown. So we're asking quite a few questions around that as well. One of the reasons I wanted to invite John onto Tourpreneur is he's very candid, he's very direct, he's coming at this a bit later in life. So he's a different perspective. He's not coming from the travel industry. He is learning about OTAs. He's learning about booking platforms. He's working on tour design, guest experience. So this is a fun interview. I think you'll get a lot out of this. And I just want to get on one of those walking tours now. So anyway, without further ado, let's cross over to John England Tours with John Coupland. How did this all get started for you?
I have a love of British history. I'm not an historian at all, never claimed to be, never will, but certainly it's a passion of mine. And of course, the history over here is very deep. An opportunity came up really in Southeast Asia, of all places. Unrelated, my family and I were in Bali and we booked a private tour guide for half a day. He was so good, we booked him for 2 more days. And I guess there was something that must have sparked my subconscious mind. I don't know what it is. He was completely independent, really good. And by the time we got to Singapore, call it spiritual or whatever, an opportunity came up through the OTA called With Locals in London. They were about to launch in London. So keeping it brief, I signed up. They interviewed me, of course, and signed up with them. And as they say, the rest is history.
And how did that come about? We haven't featured With Locals much on this show. How did that come about?
Well, for me, from what I can remember, we have relatives in Singapore, and I was in my mother-in-law's place, and I don't know, something popped up my iPad. So whether my device was listening to me in Bali, I have no idea. Good old Google, whatever you want to look into it or take from it. Yeah, so they had already got just try and answer your question, they were pretty established and still are in Southeast Asia and mainland Europe. So perhaps it was slightly belated that they were launching in London. So I'm going back to the autumn of 2017. London is our home. And so when I got back, there's just a little sub-story to that. When I told my dear wife out in Singapore saying, hey, remember With Locals? They're on the BBC travel show, And she said, yeah, that sort of like 30-year plus marriage look, and I want to be a tour guide. And I got another 30-year plus manager look like you'll never do it? And of course I did.
What was it about being a tour guide that appealed to you so much?
Well, I think really, Shane, it's all about people at the end of the day. I've been in various sectors across the board and, always really people customer facing. Obviously, in this context, it's more guest facing and really enjoy that. And, we've been blessed to be well traveled. And so we have, booked tour guides in the past. And really, I thought I'll give it a try. With hindsight, things just stacked up the right way because it was a good time to start, off peak, because I was learning. It was a huge learning curve in terms of being an independent tour guide and delivering. Theory is one thing, practicality is another.
How did you get from wanting to be a tour guide then to designing the tours that you have at John England Tours? I always smile when I speak to tourpreneurs because mainly we're like, yeah, I just got started and I built these tours. Like, no, a lot of pain, a lot of sweat and tears went into that. And we make it sound so simple. So how did you go about designing your tours?
Right. With locals, they have a proposition called With Locals Originals tours. So those are really where, with our feedback, they are tours where guests can choose more than one guide, not at the same time, of course. Yeah, they have a choice. So we're listed for London. It's the same principle in other cities that With Locals operates at. So I signed up for a couple of walking tours to start with. And when I met the team from With Locals, they're actually based in the Netherlands. They came over to London to meet us. I say, hey, look, this is where I live in the suburbs of London. I have good access to the county of Kent and Sussex and other home counties. And the wonderful castles that I know about. And how about it? Because I heard that they also have another proposition where it's hosted tours. Now, in that context, is if you come up with an idea and they like the idea and you co-design it with locals, it's yours. It's exclusively yours in the With Locals community. So I came up with Hever Castle. That's the former family home of the Boleyn family. And Boleyn, and also Leeds Castle. And that's pretty confusing because, of course, Shane, you're from these parts of the UK.
It's in Kent, right?
This is Leeds Castle in Kent, nothing to do with the city of Leeds in Yorkshire. So I tried them both, and I run a couple of other businesses, so there's no way I could have done it full time from the start. So launching them in the autumn and through the winter of 2017, 2018 was great, and then grew it. And then created my own brand as well.
So coming at this from a different industry, so not coming from the travel industry per se, how much support did With Locals give you in terms of your tour design? Because I guess you went away and you built up a tour, you created it. Did With Locals then come in and look at that and give you guidance, or did you just jump in at the deep end?
So I came up with most of the content. I won't quite claim all. They crossed the T's and dotted the I's a bit, yeah, because of course they will know what works and what doesn't in terms of copy. So yeah, it was really my content, in the context of hosted, i.e. personalized tours that would be mine. What I was very mindful of is that I didn't want to run before I could walk, no pun intended, okay? So for the castles and historic houses tours, which I've grown, of course, there are more now, Shane, it's through experience, building up confidence, learning as we're going on. So it's a good partnership and I like it a lot. And you probably picked up on Clubhouse. It's actually, I'm pretty pro OTA.
I'm curious to know what you were sitting down, sketching out your walking tours to castles and historic buildings. Like, I imagine there was other companies doing this, right? So what was your competitive edge, would you say, John?
Hand on heart, I didn't know I had one. I'm going to take a back step here and just explain something. I've jumped through corporate, years and years of corporate. And I mentioned briefly that I run a couple of businesses as an entrepreneur. And for this, I didn't actually want to treat it as a business. I wanted to enjoy it. And I know that's very cliche, but I actually really mean it. So the fact that I had an OTA that really cared and it was two-way dialogue, and we worked together on these initial projects, and thought, let's try it, yeah, was really refreshing for me. I can be a bit stubborn in my grand old age of, but I was used to also writing. So in a business context, I'm actually a columnist for a publication. And so I'm sort of used to that sort of approach. And so really I applied more or less the same methodology approach to what I was doing with the writing of the content. And so really, I guess maybe I'm in a minority here. I'd sort of like learned the other way around, if that makes any sense. I just really, decided to dive in the deep end. I'm not suggesting that in any way it's the best approach, but it worked for me.
Sure. So when you got up and running, I know we're going to share your 3 key learnings shortly, but what were some of the barriers to getting up and running? I know you said you had great support from with locals, but what were some of the other barriers you experienced?
The main one is getting to know the people who work at the various locations, okay, so the destinations. So these tours are all private. For the walking tours in London, we don't, I certainly do not go to any buildings or museums. They're all outdoors. They're walking tours, and they range from anything from 2 hours to maybe just over 3 hours. So that's a straight walking tour. For the historic houses and the castle tours, I'm a driver guide. And so that's a completely different dynamic. That's also private, okay? So in that context, for most of my private tours to the castles and historic houses, I don't simply drive my guests there. I actually accompany them into the castles and historic houses. I had to work on the relationship that I had, not just with the curators in those castles and historic houses, but also the management, because not all of them are necessarily warm to external guides.
How did you build a relationship with those members of staff?
It sounds really basic, but obviously you've got to be a listener, you've got to be friendly. One has to read people in the right way, and actually you've got to be very respectful. I knew from the start there's no way I will be welcomed if I was a tour guide that just goes in with my guests and basically point things out and deliver a private tour without even acknowledging anybody who works there. That is a big no-no, because over the years I've got to earn good trust and rapport with some of these curators and management in the various locations, and they tell me things. And so really not all external tour guides are accepted, because some will behave better than others.
This is really good feedback, because we have listeners who want to build similar tours in other places around the world. And when it does come to dealing with authority or with curators, we all get a little bit nervous. And I think sometimes that nerves can come across as being aloof towards the members of staff when it's not. I think it's just we have to get out of our comfort zones to go and speak to the members of staff.
It's not easy. I can tell you it's not easy. Some will be more amenable than others out there. It's just life. And it can put people off. And I don't blame them. If, let's say, your first rapport with a particular location doesn't go well, then, you've got the choice as to whether you persevere or you think, you know what, this is not for me. And, I guess they could see my passion. And also, one or two of them said that I was very grounded, in terms of my approach. One castle particularly, a few months later, there was a change of management. So, of course, you got to, rebuild rapport and relationships. Okay. This particular person perhaps thought that I was going to be another external tour guide that perhaps misbehaves. He wasn't giving me the benefit of the doubt. So a meeting was booked with me, and I thought it was going to be a history type question or something to test me into the history. And in fact, it wasn't anything like that. He wanted evidence as to who I knew in the castle.
Wow.
I never claimed that I know everybody, but I knew a lot and still know a lot of people there and about them. It's not just about what they do as curators. I could share their story. And so he said, you're in. But I was already in.
Yeah.
But in terms of him, he wanted to approve it himself. So that's fine. You've got to respect that.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, if something goes wrong, the buck stops with him.
So let's change tracks a little bit here. So looking at your With Locals listing, a particular tour that I think our family would love to do with you is the Crown Film Locations and Royal Secrets tour, because the Crown, certainly over here, is very, very popular. How did you go about designing that tour?
Through my experience with another tour that I do, which is part of the With Locals Originals tour. So I'd got a lot of experience by then in terms of delivering the British Royal Private Tour. And I had a few guests ask me about the Crown series. And it became very apparent in that particular private tour that they actually wanted something more specific to the story of the Crown, the series that Netflix does. What I then did, same sort of approach. I knocked on With Locals' door and say, look, this is what I want to do as a personalized hosted tour. If I come up with the content, you want to have a look at it? And they thought it was a great idea. And they actually gave me some guidance on that. And I know somebody asked about it in terms of the copywriting, and things like that. So I had some professional advice. But I came up with the content. So it's more bespoke to the Crown.
Yes. And I guess you're not using any of the images from the Crown. You're not using their logos or emblems or any of their content as such. And I gather that by saying the Crown Film Locations, there's no way they can say, hey, you can't do that, in the same way that if it was a Harry Potter tour, Harry Potter is trademarked, right? So that would be a challenge.
How many James Bond tours are there?
Yeah.
Who's shaken and not stirred? So it's not like, yeah, absolutely, you hit the nail on the head, Shane. We're not using any images that we shouldn't be using. So, that's a private walking tour. So it's all outdoors. We're not going into any buildings or any places that we shouldn't be going into.
Yeah.
I'm literally, pointing out a few places. And the dialogue is incredible because obviously the people who booked that tour with me are great fans of that series. And so, the very fact that you can relate to something and share opinions and views, because of course, one thing that's very evident is it's not a documentary, but some people perhaps think it is, but it isn't. So we have a great time talking about that. It's brilliant. I just love doing that tour.
It's incredible. I haven't watched every episode, I have to say, but I watched the latest series because that was kind of more in my lifetime. And, I learned things from it. Yes, I know it's dramatization, but for instance, I didn't know that guy broke into the palace twice. Like, I knew he'd broke in once, right, John? But I didn't know he got in there twice. And I had to go on Google and go, did that happen, or have they just drowned? And I was like, oh, wow, he actually got in there twice.
Yeah, it's maddening, really, and with hindsight. But, myself and the guests, when we walk through these tours and stuff, we have a good laugh. You can imagine, even in a private tour where you've got a small crew. For example, you may have a husband and wife, a couple, okay? And perhaps the wife is more in tune with the Crown than her hubby. So one thing I learned very, very quickly is, to be successful in this, you've got to have the good ability to read people from the start, not just what they're saying and listening to their needs and wants. It's also their body language. It's really, really important so you can deliver an exceptional tour.
Yeah, I really like this concept. It's funny you just mentioned James Bond tours. One of my favorite tours in London was actually one called the Intelligence Trail, which is a spy history tour. And of course, that guide wasn't taking me into MI5's building. I didn't expect him to whisk me through the lobby of MI6. But it was still a really fun tour because there are so many of these buildings that, speaking in London specifically, and I'm sure the same thing happens in New York City, where you walk past the building and you have no idea of the history of that building. And that was certainly the case on the Intelligence Trail. And even just the other day, I was reading something to do with the royals, and it said Prince Charles lives at Clarence House. And I had to think, I thought, where is Clarence House? And I had to go on Google and look at it, right? So even though I lived in London for years, I've walked London, there are these places that on your tour you would show me, and I go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that so-and-so lived there. I think that's the fun part.
Clarence House is a good case in point. You can imagine at peak, pre-pandemic, of course, it gets a bit crazy in central London, July, August, September. And, with the crowds outside of Buckingham Palace and various things that go on in terms of, changing the guard, etc. And if it's too busy, I'll throw in a bonus. I don't call it that. That's just internal talk in my head, and I'll show them Clarence House. I'll show them St. James's Palace, which is just around the corner. Little places that, they perhaps didn't even think of, we don't even know. And they love that because it means it's something different, as a personalized tour. Shane, I know, I've listened to some of your podcasts and stuff and obviously seen your updates. And one thing I totally relate to is, your mantra about always be learning. So I'm learning as well as I'm going along. But one thing I don't do is wing it. Like one of the other tours I do now is Chartwell, Churchill's former family home. Is not far from where I live. We're very blessed. I have retirees coming from the States, also Canada and Australia. Now, they have a lot of time to read all the books. I can't compete with that. And they know that, So I'm not going to be pretending to be something I'm not. But what I can do is to show them the surrounding area when I take them to Chartwell, and also the house and the gardens, and give them some great insights and engage them with what we call the stewards here. But the Americanized term is obviously curators.
Well, John, I have to say, I'm a history buff myself. If ever you come visit me here in Vermont, I have one room where I have over 200 books on the history of East Germany. The other room, I have all my books on the history of espionage. I can read all of those here sat in Vermont, but when I stand outside the building where Philby gave the secrets to the KGB, or where someone tunneled under the Berlin Wall, that's what an experience is all about, because you can read about it, you can watch it on YouTube, and with all due respect to all the virtual tour producers out there, nothing will ever replace standing on that spot and taking it all in.
I couldn't agree more, Shane.
Got a quick message from one of our sponsors, and then we'll get right back to today's show. Stay tuned. Your search for the industry's best online reservation system is over. Fair Harbor enables thousands of tour and activity businesses across the globe with streamlined experiences that convert website visitors into paying customers to strategically increase online bookings and overall revenue. Their highly customizable cloud-based booking solutions are designed to be easy for you and your customers. Fair Harbor eases every aspect of your day-to-day operations through one easy-to-use dashboard. Options like custom seat maps and online seat selection can all be tailored to your unique needs, while capacity limits and contactless mobile ticket scanning help you maintain the latest safety protocols. All of this alongside Fair Harbor's best-in-class 24/7 support. Visit fairharbor.com to see why over 15,000 tour, activity, and attraction businesses choose Fair Harbor. Going back to The Crown, something that I've seen stateside, so I'll have to add these episodes into the show notes. We interviewed Carrie Burns, who used to run Atlanta movie tours, and Georgette Blau in New York City. And Georgette runs quite a few TV and film location tours. And she had one which was the Sopranos tour, which was the mafia show that was on some time ago. And she actually has some of the extras. I'm not quite sure how she managed to do it, but she had them turn up because you get on a bus and they drive you over to New Jersey, and she was actually able to recruit some of the extras, and that creates so much buzz with her tour. And I wonder if you thought of it, incorporating it, obviously not right now, but when we're back to business, whether you incorporate anything like that in your tours.
I have thought of it, but for the time being, Shane, it's not for me. It may be for other people, but it's just not for me. I'm just in the space where I'm just trying to keep things simple so that I deliver. Whether it's something I'll look at, in a sort of medium, longer term, I'm not sure. Of course, in the immediate term, I've got to think about, how I rebuild post-pandemic and as we come out of the pandemic. So the priorities are going to be very different.
I understand. And it's another layer of complexity, dealing with staff, you're dealing with people being there. But I definitely think that is a cherry on the cake part of the experience as well.
My thinking on that is somebody who's worked in a theatre, okay, who's got the contacts, better place in doing something like that than I am.
Well, let's dig into the 3 key learnings that you want to share with our listeners. So first of all, you were talking about achieving outstanding reviews. How do you go about achieving outstanding reviews, John?
Get the basics right. To communicate, absolutely key prior to the tour. Keep it brief and simple. Don't write essays that people won't read. So bullet point, things like that. I'm a firm believer of treat your guests the way you want to be treated. And that is obviously good manners. So I'm just really reminding people, look, just make sure all the basics are absolutely right, smiling and, being yourself, etc. Everything that we know. Even down, if you're a driver guide, to opening the car doors for your guests. That may sound trivial, but it means a lot to them. And everybody works at a different pace, even when you've got a small group, in my context, a private group. Yeah. So, some people can stretch your patience. Just take a deep breath, and move on. But being more succinct in terms of, delivering outstanding reviews, I'm just coming from the angle of, look, don't be a perfectionist. That will just backfire for various reasons. Be yourself, aim to deliver a very memorable tour, go the extra mile, don't preempt too much, make sure there are nice surprises in your tour.
Absolutely. I can see that you have 110 reviews and they're 5-star reviews. So you're obviously doing a lot of things right.
Yeah, I like to think so. But, Shane, one thing, and, in my experience so far, and I say so far because I'm learning all the time, like I said earlier, is we can all trip up, can't we? It's easy to do, and people are very different out there, their expectations. Now, this is a point, actually. It's also about managing people's expectations. That's really important. So even, prior to booking, when I'm getting inquiries, one of the challenges that I have is, of course, I've been to America a few times. It's a big country. And so if an American family comes from a very big state, they may see, if you left Little England over to my state, it can fit God knows how many times. But as you'll know, Shane, our road system is very different. So where, for example, about managing expectations from the start is I get sometimes inquiries about doing 3 or 4 castles and historic houses in a day. I won't do that. And I'll very politely say the maximum I'll do is 2. And it may surprise them, but otherwise, what's the point of booking a private tour? The last thing I want to do is to rush anyone.
Yeah, and how do you go about managing the expectation? And I'm going to focus in on the Crown Tour again. But for instance, if someone thinks, oh yeah, I'm going to go on this tour with this guy and he's going to get me in Buckingham Palace and he's going to get me in Kensington Palace, is that ever an issue?
It generally isn't, but I've had one instance where it was. And that was actually relating to the sister tour, the British Private Royal Tour. The guests spent red, basically, and thought Buckingham Palace was included, and we never claimed that. And so she cancelled. That's fine. But no, that's the only one I can remember because, the copy, for example, with locals, I feel is very good. And they have highlights that make it very easy on the eye in terms of the web. And they're the experts. Yeah, they're the experts. I trust them on that, so they know how it works. And that really works for me.
So I guess my question for you is, I get that. I like the layout of the site. It's clean. It's easy on the eye. But obviously you have to pay a commission, right? You have to pay a revenue split to work with locals. Have you considered building your own site so you can capture direct bookings?
Yes, I'm on considering it now. And it was always on my radar, but not from the start. And I smile when I say this to you because there's a big irony here is a lot of my background in the corporate space was in e-commerce and retailing. And I was in, very early days of it. It goes back to this thing about, when I started doing private tours, although I applied what I could, what I've learned in business and my experience of booking tour guides abroad and stuff, I didn't want to treat it as a business. What I wanted to do was to deliver and enjoy delivering tours. So when I came across with locals, I was learning about this thing called OTAs. Shane, I didn't even know what OTA stood for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just being honest with you.
I can believe
and it was
it.
a huge learning curve.
I can believe
But
it.
my angle was great. So I don't have to pay franchise fees. I don't have to pay any licensing fees. They're trusting me. They've interviewed me because they appreciate my time in terms of coming up with some of the content. It's a mutual trust. Let's work together to make this happen, whether it's an originals tour or one of my own. Okay. I just saw it as a partnership, as simple as that. And the very fact that, I only pay them where they deliver. Shane, what more can I ask?
And in fact, that's your second key learning, which is how you work with OTAs and treating them as a strategic partner. Full disclosure, I worked for OTAs for almost 2 decades. So obviously I've seen both sides of this. I've seen the revenue that they can generate. I've also seen operators that have signed up with an OTA and not gotten any bookings either. And that's either because the OTA isn't marketing that area, or maybe the tour is niche. So it's not a one size fits all with OTAs either. But so what I'm hearing from you, John, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that you are more focused on working on that tour experience.
Totally. And especially initially. Now, during the pandemic, in terms of this particular sector, again, for obvious reasons, I've got more time. So perhaps belatedly, I started to network through, of course, your network, Tourpreneur, and a couple of others, and of course, Clubhouse and various other platforms to get to know people in the industry and to learn more. Always be learning.
Yes.
For me, this is where I've sort of learned the other way around. And it's actually been a joy. Not for the right reasons, of course. The tours have stopped. I'd rather be delivering tours. But I just embraced it. Just to give you a case in point, I'll be developing a website of some sort, hopefully this summer, because one of the challenges is where you want to form your own partnerships. It's much easier to do it, of course, through your own domain. And that's what I wanted to do in the long run anyway, but it just wasn't something that I wanted to do initially.
And have you researched booking platforms yet?
Yes, I have. Very interesting journey so far. My goodness.
How has that been for you?
Challenging.
Yeah.
So we got with locals and they don't do APIs for the time being on Bookit platform. So, that's fine with me in terms of doing availability and whatnot on their platform. I'm also with Viator, and of course, everybody knows, or most people know, they're owned by TripAdvisor Experiences. So I joined them, spring or summer of 2018. So started with 0 reviews and to build that up, of course, in their criteria. And of course, that's a very different dynamic in terms of partnership for reasons you will know. And then I signed up with Expedia. They wanted me on.
Okay, so we're talking about OTAs here rather than booking platforms.
Very challenging because, of course, to keep it generic, because I don't want to name names in terms of booking platforms, but I am speaking to a handful of them. And one or two of them, look, I don't want to use a platform that is like a sledgehammer to crack a nut. I just want to keep it simple with the bells and whistles that will help me spend the least amount of time working things out.
Sure. So a nice, clean, easy, simple platform.
Absolutely. But they need to talk, of course, that platform needs to talk to the OTAs and, of course, my website, okay, when that's launched. And as you know, and I'm sure a lot of listeners can relate to, not all of these booking platforms speak to the OTAs. Yeah, because some of them don't have APIs, some of them do. So that's a huge challenge.
So is that number one for you? Is that when you're shopping, is that your number one concern when you're speaking to a booking platform like that? You need to be able to talk to these OTAs.
Yes, but I'm trying to be realistic, and I've accepted that I'm not going to get the one out there that's going to speak to all of them. Now, when I say all, I'm trying to keep it tight, by the way. I don't spray and pray, basically. These are private, curated tours. But it's got to work for me as well to, when the tours come back, again, I want to be delivering tours and enjoy doing that. I don't want to be sat in front of a laptop trying to work things out.
How close are you to making a decision on who you're going to pick?
Whittle it down to at least two, possibly three in my short list, but I've still got some outstanding questions, one of which is cost.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. No, it would be fun to chat with you and maybe a round table with other tour operators in a similar position once you've made your decision, because of course I hear all the sales pitches, right? I get all the promotional bumps from all the booking platforms. I see them all. But when you are a tourpreneur about to make that decision, it's very, very difficult because everyone is telling you they're the best. Everyone is telling you it's easy and seamless and it'll give you no headaches and it does everything you need.
Absolutely, Shane. And again, I'm just trying to keep it brief because I don't want to name names or
Yeah. No, it's fine.
Sit here and criticize anyone. It's my challenge. I'm accountable and I'll see it through.
But it's a challenge for the whole industry, particularly for our listeners who are small to medium size. It's a potential minefield. And that's why we have the Meet the ResTech series on Tourpreneur, where we have the ResTech, a customer and a shopper, to try and share the information and eradicate the sales noise and actually get to, let's have a look under the hood. What does your booking platform actually do? How is it going to help me? What problems is it going to solve? It's a huge decision to make. It's the plumbing for your whole website.
I mean, I'm using one already. It's okay. But whether it's going to do what I want to do in the future is another matter. So at least I've got some experience in terms of using a particular booking platform behind the scenes. Interesting journey so far.
Your third and final piece of advice was never let others pressure you into doing things your gut tells you otherwise. There's a lot of BS out there. I'm intrigued, John. How do you mean exactly?
I picked up, for example, Shane, in one of your very recent podcasts that your background's in sales. Yeah. And as you'll know, my background's in sales. And as you know, one of the very important criteria is to qualify. Yeah. Listen and qualify. It sounds very basic, but I think there's a lack of that. There's assumptions that people are either doing X or not doing Y, and then suddenly it's preaching. What I want to balance it with is absolutely, there's a lot of giving out there. And I really relate to that and respect that, especially at this time. But it's for those who, let's say, a web agency, to really cut through the noise and say, what works and what doesn't, but with some evidence. Why do they not bring up one or two of their clients up on stage? Instead of just telling us how wonderful they are, yeah, why do they not bring up a couple of clients who can tell us with them what has worked in their story? That's very rare.
I hear you. And I've said this on air before. And I often think that's because a lot of these events, they just have 20 minutes to speak to us. And it's very difficult to pack everything into that 20 minutes. And I see a lot of these events that the sessions are just too short.
They are, but to challenge that bit, why can't they do their own? Agencies are good marketers, so show us how you market. I'm not saying that hopping on somebody else's expo online, offline is the wrong thing. But alongside that, if they're so expert in Google and stuff, they wouldn't have a problem reaching out to us. And that they're going to have a couple of clients for an hour's webinar. That's a point of difference to me. I'll hop on it. I may even pay some money for it.
Yeah. And I think you bang on with that. I guess it comes down to, and I can't speak, I know we're using marketing agencies here, but they're busy working with their customers. They don't have time to run a webinar. I get that. You don't just hit a button and suddenly you create a webinar. Even to come on the show, right? I get besieged by tech companies who want to come on Tourpreneur because obviously there's not many places where you can go and get access to, we're almost at 150,000 downloads of the show now. And I always say, yeah, give me 3 references of existing tour operators. And 9 times out of 10, I don't get a reply back, John.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, Shane. It's a frustration of mine. It doesn't mean I don't value what's being shared, but it's just overwhelming. I know I'm not the only one who's saying that. It's just very overwhelming.
No, and this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you today, because you are coming at this almost from outside the industry. So I'm really curious to know, when I see events being put on and the participation rate or the attendance rate is low.
Well, my suggestions as follows. So on Facebook, maybe it was a bit of luck, but Facebook did a campaign and I was able to actually speak to a Facebook specialist who works for Facebook back end of last year, 3 1-hour phone calls for free. Now, they reached out to me. I'm not saying I'm a big player, I'm not, but I had a lot of respect for that. And I asked the specialist a couple of questions, not to catch her out. She took it away and came back to me and answered those questions for a particular campaign I want to do. Wow.
Huge.
That's what I mean by the bars being raised. And these agencies need to know it because Facebook is competing with them. Who am I going to listen to? Am I going to listen to an agency that talks a lot of baloney or hot air or the samey thing for 20 minutes? Or am I going to spend 3 hours with Facebook doing it for free? It's a no-brainer.
I get it, but I also do understand from the agencies, and again, we're using agencies here. It's a time, it's a bandwidth thing. They don't have massive teams of people to do that. I get it, and it's hard for them as well because
it is hard. I know.
I'm quoting that number, right? Let's say it's $3,000 a month retainer. Most of us don't have that money, John. Even in the good times.
Not now.
Well, even in the good times, right? Even in the good times to spend.
It's crazy.
John, that $3,000 is just for the expert advice. That's not for your ad campaign. So there's that on top, right? My final piece of advice on this, and it's to any entrepreneur, not just in tours, but go get references. Do your due diligence before you spend money with anybody. Because I tell you what, John, you don't want to name names on here, and I certainly don't want to do that. I get tons of emails from tourpreneurs who are like, I just bought this, or I just hired that company and I feel ripped off. I didn't get value, et cetera, et cetera. And my heart goes out to those tourpreneurs because, as I just said, we don't have reservoirs of cash to waste on those kinds of things. So please, ask for 3 references. And if they can't give you at least 3 references, then you have to ask yourself, is that company worth working with?
Absolutely. And I relate to what you just said, Shane, because running a business network, which is unrelated to the sector, I get the same as well.
As we wrap up here, where can people find your tours online, John?
If you want to book a tour, for the time being, you can engage with me on my Facebook page. That's John England Tours. Just search John England Tours. And, because they're private tours, you ask me what you want. It's in England, Southeast England, and with locals, of course. I believe you've got the link, Shane.
Yes, and I will add those to today's show notes, which you can find at tourpreneur.com/151. Well, I hope it's not too long before you and I can share a beer or a Guinness in London town, sir.
That would be lovely, Shane. I look forward to that.
Thanks for coming on, John.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Tourpreneur podcast. Be sure to visit tourpreneur.com to join the conversation and access the show notes, including links to the resources mentioned on today's episode. This is Tourpreneur.